Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to PMAC Armchair Interview. I'm Pavit Pinvijit, on location here at the Grand Hyatt Erawan Hotel in Bangkok. We are moments away from speaking to the Prince Mahidol Award laureate for 2024. But before we meet the laureate, let's address a global challenge. The incidence of cancer has been rising around the world. According to the International Agency for Research in Cancer, 2022 saw a staggering 20 million new cancer cases and 9.7 million deaths. However, significant progress has been made in the fight against cancer. Our first guest discovered tyrosine kinase, which revolutionized how we understand cancer growth and the body's mechanism to fight it. His work laid the foundation for the discovery of life-saving targeted therapy. Today, we are honored to speak with Professor Tony Hunter, a professor of medicine at the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California. Let's go meet him. We were talking about your work on tyrosine kinase earlier. Can you tell us in simple terms what they are and what the role they play in oncology?
So tyrosine kinases are enzymes. Enzymes catalyze chemical reactions. In this case, these enzymes add a simple phosphate molecule to a particular place on a protein. And what we discovered was a new type of kinase which adds phosphate to one of the 20 amino acids in proteins called tyrosine that hadn't been identified before. So we stumbled on, by studying these viruses, we'd studied on a new principle of protein modification.
Well, actually, we have a simple model of your tyrosine kinase, and I made it, and hopefully we can show our audience like what it does. So basically, this is the tyrosine kinase. It phosphorylates the tyrosine peptide, right? And which leads to downstream activation, cellular activation.
Right.
If the cellular activation is normal, then maybe you can activate it, one at a time.
Right.
Right?
In a highly regulated fashion.
Correct.
Yes.
So it's controlled. Nothing, unseemly about this. But if you have an abnormal tyrosine kinase enzyme, then what happens is it can go crazy, right?
It can go many rounds of action. Yes, that's
correct.
That's true.
And this is just a noise. It's already annoying. If this is a cancer cell growth, that would be bad. Your work led to something which is called a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, correct?
Yes.
What does it do?
The tyrosine kinase inhibitor locks on to this enzyme, this protein enzyme, and prevents it from adding phosphate to proteins.
Okay, how about this one, right? So previously we blocked that.
Right.
So now we can't phosphorylate.
Right, exactly, yes.
Okay.
So it turns off the process in the cells, stops the cells growing and dividing. What viruses have done is to exploit this by making their own enzymes that now drive cells to continue to grow and form cancers. And so once we knew that cells had this activity, and we found in some cancer cells that these enzymes were activated by a genetic mutation, we realized that yes, tyrosine kinase inhibitors would potentially be a new treatment. 30 years after, or maybe a little less, that the first tyrosine kinase inhibitor drugs were developed, and then the first one was approved 2001.
I read about your work. It turns out that there's some element of luck involved, correct?
There was indeed, yes. So we didn't know what amino acid the kinase added, the phosphate to. And the night I did the first experiment, it was late and I was too lazy to make up a fresh solution of the buffer that one needed to do this assay. And so I used an old one. We'd used radioactive phosphate to track where the phosphate went. The next morning when I came in to develop the assay, I discovered to my amazement that the phosphate was on a new amino acid and not the two we expected. And I didn't know what it was, but that's when I later figured out it was tyrosine. If I had used a fresh buffer, I wouldn't have been able to find this new phosphoamino acid. So there was certainly an element of luck.
Right, serendipity, basically.
Serendipity played a big role, right.
Yeah, that's very lucky, but actually you observed it and you were able to make a difference, like you see the difference between the...
Yes, it could have been what we call an artifact, which was a mistake of some sort, but it turned out, I thought it was probably real, and it with some follow-up, it turned out, yes, it was a real and important discovery.
What are the challenges we have left?
We've realized that there are many different targets that can be blocked by the tyrosine kinase inhibitors. A tumor cell or a set of tumor cells become resistant to the inhibitor. They develop they escape from the inhibition, often through another genetic change. And that means that the drug stops working. And so now what people try and do is to find a second drug that synergizes, acts together with the first drug to block this mechanism through which the cells become resistant. Drug combinations are going to be necessary. So while they've been a huge success and they have certainly helped people and increased survival, they're not the magic bullets, except in the case of the first tyrosine kinase inhibitor, TKI, that was approved in 2001, imatinib, better known as Gleevec, which has turned out almost to be a cure for the disease of chronic myelogenous leukemia. Patients who went on that drug in 2001 many of them are still alive and still taking the drug. So it's turned what would have been a deadly disease into a chronic disease that is manageable, presumably for the rest of their lives. Whereas most other leukemias and other solid tumors have multiple changes, and that you can, if you target one of those changes, the other changes are still there and can override the effect of the drug.
In keeping with this year PMAC theme, AI and computer play a really big role in the science these days.
Right.
And how does it play in your research?
We haven't used it a lot yet. So we've done a little bit with AlphaFold, which is an AI-based program that allows you to predict how proteins fold up, and that's actually incredibly powerful. And other than that, we've not used it a lot, but I'm sure we are going to. Our institute is ramping up to allow us to do this for free, and so I know we're going to be using it a lot. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Hunter, for sharing your work with us, and congratulations on receiving the awards.
I'm deeply honored to have been chosen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our next laureate has witnessed the toll of violence firsthand and decided to do something about it. No, it's not Batman, but the story of a real-life hero making a difference. He started his career as an oral maxillofacial surgeon. He developed the Cardiff model for violence prevention, a groundbreaking approach that uses emergency department data to formulate policing and public safety strategies. He is Emeritus Professor, a criminologist, and Director of the Institute for Crime, Security and Justice Innovation at Cardiff University in the UK. Let's go meet Professor Jonathan Shepherd. So what inspires you to become a criminologist? Very unusual career for a doctor.
Yeah, well, I didn't have an ambition to be a criminologist, but what I wanted to do was to find out about the causes of violence and the risk factors for violence, which were putting so many people onto my operating table and in my clinic, people who'd been injured in violence. So it's trying to find out what the causes were, but I didn't have an ambition to become a criminologist. That's a label that people gave me afterwards.
Can you tell us how you came up with the Cardiff model?
Well, in my PhD, one of the discoveries was that the police don't know about 2/3 of violence that results in emergency hospital treatment. And I was really shocked by this. How can it be that the main agency to do with law enforcement and crime prevention doesn't know about all this serious violence? And so I thought that if we could combine data from the emergency department with the police data and then prevent violence in Cardiff, the city where I was working, that may be more effective than relying just on what the police did know. And the evaluation showed that was very much the case.
The police didn't know about most of the cases because of what?
Police don't know about a great deal of violence, we discovered, because police knowledge depends on injured people reporting what's happened to them. But many people choose not to report. Many people don't report. And they don't report because they don't want their own behaviour scrutinised. They may have been habitually drunk. They may be involved in the drug trade. They may carry weapons or be involved in gangs. So those people, they're very likely to get injured in violence, but they're not going to want to tell the police.
Domestic violence, that's maybe another.
Yeah, and then the second reason people don't go to the police is because they're afraid of reprisals.
Yes.
So that's the case with domestic violence. People don't report, largely women of course, but not exclusively. They don't want to report to the police because of what their partner might do to them. Or if it's the manager of a big nightclub, they don't want the police involved every time there's a punch-up. Right. Or an injury in their nightclub or their tavern, so they don't go to the police.
What were the biggest challenges when you had to work with the police? Were there challenges or was it easy?
There were challenges working with the police, and first of all, they thought and they said, we know where the violence is happening. We don't need to have data from the emergency department. So to start with, there was another comparison of police and emergency department records, and that showed the police again that they were missing a lot of serious violence. And then after that, they became very keen collaborators. And police and surgeons have a lot in common. We're action orientated, we do investigations. So I found that the police and surgery have quite a lot in common, actually.
Nowadays, the surveillance of the general public is very extensive with the big data, with the CCTV, with all the records being computerized. How do you think this is going to change the way you report crime or go about preventing crime?
Well, we did a trial of CCTV, public space CCTV, and found that if there was surveillance using CCTV cameras, then people were prevented from being injured, because the CCTV footage, if it was real-time surveillance, meant that the people operating the cameras could get the police. That worked very well.
How do you share the information between the hospital and the police?
Well, the data is all anonymized, so it's not sharing information about people's addresses or their personal information. It's all information about where the violence happened, particularly, which school it was, which public house, which nightclub, etc. And the weapon that was used, was it a knife or was it a glass like this?
Yeah, because breakable is, yeah.
There are key ways to prevent that by making sure it's toughened glass, tempered glass,
right,
or polycarbonate drinking vessels, for example. And then what was the relationship between the person who hit you and yourself? Was it a stranger? Was it a domestic situation? Because if it's a domestic violence, then the different set of interventions can be applied.
What areas of crime prevention do you think we should pay attention to in these days?
Well, I think that it's important that we focus particularly on the high harm violence. So violence in which people are injured badly enough to need hospital treatment or being admitted to hospital is obviously more important than violence which doesn't result in injury. Results of our work, I think, is to make violence a public health issue and not just something for law enforcement and the criminal justice system.
What would you advise the policymakers, or should they do in order to contribute to this reduction in crime?
Two things particularly. I think forming a multi-agency violence prevention board in every city is important. So police, health, education, public health, city government working together and meeting regularly to institute violence prevention measures based on this combined data. The second important thing is to make sure that there is high quality data coming from every emergency department in that city, so that can be combined by an analyst with what the police do know to get a complete picture of the violence in the city.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Professor Shepherd, for being with us, and congratulations on receiving the award.
Well, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And that was Professor Tony Hunter and Professor Jonathan Shepherd. If you like this video, give us thumbs up and subscribe to Prince Maydon Award channel. See you again next year.